Nostalgia has a unique way of transporting us back to the good old days when life was simpler, and our biggest concern was which game to play next. For many gamers, the mention of the Nintendo Gamecube brings forth a wave of cherished memories from the early 2000s. Memories of late night gaming sessions, fierce Super Smash Bros. Melee battles, and unforgettable adventures exploring Luigi's Mansion. Yet amid all the fond recollections, there's a looming question that often arises. Did the Gamecube fail? This seemingly simple question has sparked countless debates, fueled by warm memories, industry analysis, and personal experiences. In this video, we aim to delve deep into the history and impact of this beloved system, to explore whether it can truly be considered a failure, or if it deserves a different label altogether. The Gamecube story is a complex and fascinating one, so join me on this nostalgic and informative journey as we revisit the past to understand the rise, fall, and lasting impact of this intriguing platform.
I am Lady Decade, and I have a question. Is the Gamecube a failed console?
Failure is often considered a particularly strong word with lots of negative connotations attached to it. So it's not surprising that for many who love the Gamecube, the idea of it being a failed piece of hardware is not a concept that many of them are willing to simply take lying down. So therefore we'll argue online with people until the cows come home as to why they believe the Gamecube to have been a huge success. So before we move on, let's attempt to define failure more clearly. Failure is a concept that typically refers to the inability to achieve a desired or intended outcome or goal. It's a relative term, as what constitutes failure can vary depending on the context and individual perspectives. Further reasons as to why the system's failings continue to remain up for debate. But opinions aside, factually, failure often implies that one's efforts or actions did not lead to the expected or desired result. Failure can take many forms, including not hitting personal goals, professional endeavours, and business objectives.
All areas that Nintendo weren't happy with when it came to the Gamecube.
So with that said, let's look back at the Gamecube's life cycle and attempt to analyse the myriad of factors that led to its perceived failure within the context of Nintendo's gaming console generation. To truly grasp the extent of the Gamecube's perceived shortcomings, we must first acknowledge that success and failure are relative terms, often shaped by a company's own expectations and the ever-evolving landscape of the gaming industry. In the grand scheme of Nintendo's home console lineage, the Gamecube marked a noticeable decline in the company's trajectory. It became the third consecutive system to fall significantly short of its predecessor in terms of sales. To illustrate this decline, we can track the sales figures from the NES, which sold an impressive 62 million units. However, in the subsequent generation, the Super Nintendo managed to sell only 49 million units, signifying a decline in popularity. The trend continued with the Nintendo 64, which further decreased sales to 32 million units. By the time the Gamecube arrived, Nintendo had seen a substantial drop, selling a mere 21 million units, indicating that a substantial portion of their once loyal fan base had abandoned their home consoles over the years. With such a backdrop, it is imperative to investigate the key factors that contributed to Nintendo's embarrassing third-place finish in that console generation. Was it primarily a result of the formidable competition in the industry, or did Nintendo's own strategic missteps play a more pivotal role with regards to the brand's fall from grace too?
Let's delve into this matter and attempt to provide a detailed analysis.
One of the initial aspects deserving scrutiny when evaluating the Gamecube's underperformance is its immediate predecessor, the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 in hindsight appears as a peculiar console in Nintendo's history. It boasts some of the most innovative, state-of-the-art and beloved games of all time, including titles such as Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and GoldenEye. These iconic titles etched their place in gaming history, solidifying the Nintendo 64's legacy. However, despite these achievements, it fell short of its competition, more specifically the Sony PlayStation, and this contributed to its reduced appeal in the market. When comparing the PlayStation library to that of the Nintendo 64, it becomes abundantly clear that the former was an expansive and diverse collection of games, catering to enthusiasts of virtually every conceivable gaming genre. The PlayStation boasted a vast array of high-quality titles, providing fans with outstanding gaming experiences. This appeal was amplified by the use of cost-effective CD-ROM media, which was well received by both developers and players. But what truly set the PlayStation apart was the platform's perfect marketing, which resulted in an enormous user base, making it a dream platform for third-party publishers seeking to reach a wide audience.
For this reason, the PlayStation library grew and grew and grew.
In stark contrast, the Achilles heel of the Nintendo 64 lay in its choice of using dated, expensive cartridge-based media for its games. If a third-party developer aspired to create a game for the Nintendo 64, they encountered a two-fold challenge. First, they had to shoulder the substantial upfront costs of procuring these specialized cartridges from Nintendo. Second, they were required to relinquish a more substantial portion of their profits to Nintendo compared to what Sony demanded for the PlayStation. As a result, it was an evident win-win for third-party developers to lend their support to the much more popular PlayStation. When it comes to this, it is well documented that the Nintendo 64's decision to opt for costly cartridges was ostensibly rooted in Nintendo's concerns about potential software piracy, where they feared losing profits. However, in this particular instance, it seemed like the company's avarice led them to make a self-defeating choice. The high costs and limited storage capacity of these cartridges drove publishers away, ultimately weakening the Nintendo 64 for the entire generation. The dearth of available games had a cascading effect on the console's reception. It became somewhat of a polarizing platform, with many consumers, including myself, choosing to purchase a Sony PlayStation. Despite the problems that stopped the Nintendo 64 ever truly living up to expectations, the platform still retained a devoted core of fans who cherished the iconic first-party titles sporadically released by Nintendo, which managed to keep their dedicated community engaged, even if most opted to own a PlayStation instead.
Speaking of which, I have got a favour to ask you. Subscribe now if you preferred the Sony PlayStation, but if you preferred the N64, subscribe now.
Got him!
You might be wondering why we're delving into the shortcomings of the Nintendo 64 in a discussion about the Gamecube. Well, the reason for this is rather straightforward. The initial stumbling block for the Gamecube can be traced back to the Nintendo 64 itself. The Nintendo 64 in a way can be held responsible for shrinking Nintendo's market share and dissuading a substantial portion of consumers from considering a second place under-supported gaming console. Consider this. When we acknowledge that the PlayStation had outperformed the Nintendo 64, it becomes apparent that most gamers who had experienced that era were eager to become owners of the PlayStation 2 upon its release. In fact, prior to its release, the PlayStation 2 quickly became the most eagerly anticipated console of all time. The PlayStation 2 was an instant sensation, capturing the hearts of gamers as soon as it hit store shelves. Its popularity was further fueled by its ability to play DVDs, a groundbreaking feature at the time. Moreover, the system's backwards compatibility meant that players could continue enjoying their existing library of games on the new console. This perfect storm of features led to the PlayStation 2 becoming the best-selling game console in history, still not being topped to this very day. With this context in mind, it was clear even before the GameCube's inception that Nintendo would face a daunting challenge in securing a substantial market share. Two key factors played against the GameCube's sales success: the PlayStation 2's immediate triumph and the Nintendo 64's lack of robust third-party support, which had already eroded a portion of Nintendo's fan base in favour of Sony's offerings.
But as said earlier, there were still reasons to love Nintendo home consoles, right?
Well, of course there were. As mentioned earlier, there is no denying that the Nintendo 64 had multiple iconic top-tier games, so the anticipation of receiving sequels to these classics on the GameCube was a compelling reason for many to keep an eye out for the right moment to invest in one of these new consoles. But if you take a close look at the GameCube's library, it seems that Nintendo didn't quite manage to follow up with many noteworthy successes to its biggest hits from the previous generation. Allow me to quickly walk you through a few of these titles so that you can better understand what I mean. The pivotal moment in the Nintendo 64's history, the game that forever altered the landscape of gaming on that console, was none other than Super Mario 64. This innovative three-dimensional platformer revolutionized the gaming world by introducing players to a vast environment where they could freely manipulate the camera angle and explore with boundless creativity. Many Nintendo 64 owners harbored deep hopes for a direct sequel to this groundbreaking title, only to be met with a rather bitter disappointment in the form of Super Mario Sunshine. To this day, many consider it one of the least enjoyable 3D Mario games ever created. The introduction of the flood mechanic, a curious device that Mario uses to clean various elements of the game world, was something fans never truly desired or asked for. This unanticipated addition felt more like an unwelcome chore rather than a compelling gameplay mechanic to most players. As a result, Super Mario Sunshine managed to alienate many Mario enthusiasts, pushing the series further away from the elements that had made it so beloved in the first place.
Super Mario Sunshine, more like Super Mario's coldest, most rainiest day.
For those who didn't hold Super Mario 64 as their favourite game of the previous generation, titles like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask may have held a special place in their hearts. These two Zelda games successfully made the transition to the third dimension, delivering precisely what fans had hoped for from the series. So when the GameCube arrived, fans anticipating another dark and gritty Zelda installment were taken aback by The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. Something which looked once again nothing like what the general public had a big appetite for. Nintendo's refusal to bend to consumers' demands resulted in an entirely new art style and a departure from the darker tone that some long-term fans had grown accustomed to. Although The Wind Waker proved to be an excellent game in its own right, it undoubtedly left a sizable portion of the Nintendo fanbase feeling disconnected. Interestingly, GameCube owners did eventually receive a dark, gritty Zelda game, but it arrived so late in the GameCube's lifespan that most players had either given up hope on the console or had already moved onto either the PS2, Xbox, or had simply jumped to the next generation of gaming, enjoying an Xbox 360 or playing Twilight Princess on the Nintendo Wii instead.
The console that it launched first on, anyway.
GoldenEye, another immensely popular game among Nintendo fans, also never saw a GameCube entry. In fact, in what would be an epic blow for Nintendo, the acclaimed developer Rare would release only one title for the GameCube, Star Fox Adventures. Unfortunately, it turned out to be another divisive sequel that nobody wanted and nobody asked for. History now shows us that this was because it was a transformation of Rare's original IP, Dinosaur Planet, into a Star Fox title. Nintendo's meddling and insistence, particularly from Shigeru Miyamoto, to make this unique game a Star Fox one, strained the relationship between Nintendo and Rare during its development. This would be the final new title they would release on a Nintendo home console. The absence of Rare was a substantial blow to Nintendo, as this publisher had been a driving force behind the appeal of the Nintendo 64, and their sudden departure left a void in the GameCube's game library that was challenging to fill.
But it wasn't just the lack of follow-ups that held the GameCube back.
Looking back, it's rather perplexing how Nintendo, in a seemingly self-defeating manner, made peculiar decisions regarding their choice of storage media for their games. In a stark departure from the ubiquitous cartridges of yesteryears, Nintendo opted for miniature GameCube optical discs, a move that limited their storage capacity to a mere 1.5 gigabytes, in stark contrast to the PlayStation 2's DVDs, which boasted a capacious 4.7 gigabytes of data. paper. This choice instantly rendered Nintendo's game discs incapable of housing even a third of the voluminous content that their counterparts on the PlayStation 2 could accommodate. A puzzling choice to say the least, but one of which many once again put down to Nintendo's fear of piracy. Early in the PlayStation 2's life cycle, it was graced with groundbreaking titles that went on to reshape the gaming world. Games like Grand Theft Auto 3, a remarkably violent yet captivating sandbox experience, introduced a level of freedom and immersion that left gamers astounded, and it was unlike anything the gaming community had ever witnessed. Additionally, early adopters of the PlayStation 2 were treated to the grandeur of Final Fantasy X, a sprawling and immersive Japanese role-playing game that would redefine the genre, offering an unforgettable gaming experience. Notably, the graphical prowess of Final Fantasy X was second to none, representing some of the most impressive visual achievements in gaming up to that point. The PlayStation 2 was part of pop culture fabric before its release and remained consistently relevant for many years to come. In stark contrast, the GameCube from Nintendo failed to chart a similar course, and it didn't make the same resounding impact even the Nintendo 64 had in the previous generation. It quickly became apparent that all the most in-demand games of the era predominantly graced the PlayStation 2. The system seemed to be a paragon of perfection, effectively setting the benchmark for gaming. Notably, the Xbox, another contender in the same generation, contributed significantly to the world of gaming. The Xbox offered an unprecedented online console gaming experience, setting new standards in this regard, with its robust processing power enabling it to deliver some of the most impressive console graphics globally.
So, where did this leave the GameCube exactly?
That gaming generation, Nintendo found itself facing off against two formidable competitors, both of whom were continually pushing the boundaries of innovation, a characteristic that Nintendo had once been renowned for. The GameCube, in all honesty, struggled to make a meaningful contribution to the evolution of gaming during this period. In fact, it becomes a challenging task to pinpoint any significant advancements that the GameCube brought to the table. If we critically evaluate the GameCube's legacy in terms of innovation, its most memorable feature might just be that distinctive handle attached to the console. Even the Dreamcast, a console that arrived on the scene much earlier, managed to achieve more in terms of gaming progression. It offered comparable graphics and delivered titles like Shenmue, which played a pivotal role in redefining how many games are experienced today, something which certainly cannot be said for the GameCube. The GameCube's primary selling point was no more than simply its ability to facilitate the play of first-party Nintendo games, which, while beloved, was not sufficient to overshadow the superior capabilities of its competitors. In retrospect, the GameCube appeared to be somewhat of an outlier in a gaming era marked by innovation and progress, as it struggled to carve out a substantial niche in a market dominated by platforms that consistently pushed the boundaries of what gaming could achieve.
But despite this, why are so many people so passionate about this platform, even now?
When delving into the realm of the GameCube's gaming library, it becomes undeniably apparent that it harboured a treasure trove of truly remarkable titles. The likes of Super Smash Bros. Melee, Pikmin, Metroid Prime, Luigi's Mansion, and Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door were but a mere selection from this bountiful roster. These exclusive gems glittered brightly in the GameCube's constellation of offerings, though regrettably their brilliance failed to outshine the competition wielded by rival gaming systems. In the lead up to the release of the platform, Nintendo's global presence in the gaming industry had been dwindling steadily, and at times it appeared as though the GameCube might well be the harbinger of the company's ultimate departure from the console arena. The prevailing sentiment was that Nintendo was ill-equipped to vie on equal terms with the technological giants that were Sony and Microsoft, and it appeared as though Nintendo had become an antiquated relic, unable to keep pace with the relentless march of progress. However, for those who felt the GameCube was the beginning of the end for Nintendo, such apprehensions were soon proven to be entirely misplaced. Nintendo, having absorbed the valuable lessons from the GameCube's missteps and the dwindling support for its predecessor, the Nintendo 64, opted for a distinct and transformative path. It was a path that diverged from the conventional race to offer the most powerful gaming console, with Nintendo realizing that it needed to not compete head-to-head with the likes of Sony and Microsoft in a game of brute force. The GameCube's relative failure, in conjunction with the shifting tides of the industry, compelled Nintendo to embrace a paradigm shift. The company chose innovation over emulation, pioneering an era of gimmick-laden gaming experiences. Subsequent Nintendo home consoles abandoned the conventional formula in favour of a more eccentric approach, where unique features and gameplay innovations took precedence over raw processing power. This strategic shift, catalysed by the GameCube's less than stellar performance, marked a pivotal moment in Nintendo's history, forever altering the trajectory of their console offerings. The Wii with its motion controls, the Wii U with its tablets, and the Switch with its dock and handheld mode were all hugely different from the powerful systems Sony and Microsoft have been bringing to the table each generation, resulting in Nintendo being hugely relevant even to this day. So, if it was not for the GameCube's shortcomings, we may have a different gaming landscape today. The GameCube failed commercially due to various factors, but its enduring appeal is rooted in its unique games, hardware design, and the nostalgia it holds for those who grew up with it, making it a cherished part of gaming history despite its commercial shortcomings. The GameCube failed, but it is now a failed console that people love more than ever. If you enjoyed watching my video on this failure, check out my video on a bigger Nintendo flop. Click my Virtual Boy video now.